Alright, what is up guys? It is Storm back here with another video, and in this one I am bringing you another part to the New Dawn, a Naruto/Boruto story, and that is part 8. Now, why don't you just go and click that red subscribe button, and click that like button blue, and hit that bell and turn on post notifications so you never miss a video. I mean, they're all free, so just why not, right? Also, if you want to, go follow me on all the socials. The links to those will be down in the description as well as my other channels. Now, enough with the plugging. Let's just dive right on in. Boruto was laying on his bed, staring at the ceiling. There wasn't much else to do. The Crimson Tide had immediately packed up shop and moved on, leaving the tiny island behind. It seemed odd to Boruto how quickly they just left. From what he could tell, the town had been under their thumb for many months. It didn't make much sense for them to just up and leave. Maybe because they captured me, Boruto thought. Maybe they feared retaliation from the Hidden Leaf. He was the son of the Hokage, as much as he did hate it. His dad had probably had some sort of team searching for him. Maybe Anbu. Maybe nobody. A dark voice in Boruto's head whispered. Maybe his dad was glad to have him gone. Finally. The family that he never had time for was finally diminished by one. By one, the greatest embarrassment to their family. Boruto tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep, especially with his dark thoughts. Sighing heavily, he stood, and made his way over to the small porthole window in his cabin. The ship rocked with the waves as they sailed through the night. He stared out over the water, watching as waves rolled by. The candlelight danced in the reflection of the window, giving him just enough light to see his face. Alone and without the constant, watchful eye of Eiji or Hikari, he finally took the chance to channel chakra into his eyes. Boruto felt the pressure build behind his eyeballs. Not uncomfortable, but there all the same. He felt the skin on his forehead and temple writhe, as veins he didn't even know he had bulged, and pulsed with every beat of his heart. His eyes, the vibrant sky blue that Sarada complimented him on, faded to a pale shader of lavender. His pupils faded entirely, leaving his eyes eerily blank, as if he was blind, and yet he wasn't. Quite the opposite, in fact. He was not unseeing, but all-seeing. The world was aflame with azure fire as everything turned blue. He could see every minute detail and flaw in the glass he stared through. Every pore in the imperfections the glassmaker had made. There was a dizziness that came with the Byakugan that Boruto didn't expect. The sensation of, quite literally, having eyes on the back of his head made his mind spin. Without turning, he could see the entirety of the rest of his small cabin. The bunk bolted to the floor on the wall opposite of him, the door opposite the bed, the small desk and chair bolted to the floor next to him. It wasn't just the range of his vision that disturbed him, but the acuity of it. He could see the grains in the wooden floor on the opposite side of the room. He could clearly make out the scuff marks on the door frame, where it had been opened and closed one too many times, without a fresh layer of lacquer. He could see the wear and tear on the doorknob, once a golden color, now worn down to steel after countless years of hands turning it. Dropping his gaze to his hands, he examined himself. There was a ball of fire roaring in his belly, the distinctive hue of chakra. Thin veins extended from the fire, circulating and connecting his body. Every once in a great while, a small nodule of fire broke up the veins. Boruto knew that what he was seeing was the chakra pathway system. He had learned about it extensively, thanks to the academy and his grandfather. This was the true target of the Gentle Fist, to attack an opponent's chakra directly, to cripple them, and leave them unable to fight back. He had learned the Gentle Fist from a young age, along with his sister, but he could never apply the fighting style as well as her without the aid of the Byakugan. Now, he could clearly see the chakra points with his Byakugan, where with the slightest touch of the Gentle Fist, he could close. Boruto could see a silhouette through the walls, walking down the hallway towards his cabin. The silhouette opened his door without even knocking. It was Hikari. Her chakra was interesting, Boruto decided. Calm like a pool of water, yet underneath raging like the tide. He got the distinct feeling of both water and lightning from her. Hikari took one look at his back, before her eyes drifted to his reflection in the window of the porthole. Instantly, 3 throwing needles appeared in her hands, held lightly between the tips of her fingers. Had Boruto not had his Byakugan activated, he would have missed the slight twitch of her fingers as the needles fell from somewhere inside the sleeve of her fatigues. "What are you doing?" Hikari demanded. Boruto could see through the slits of her hidden mist hunter mask, cold, hard eyes staring at him, watching for any hint of movement. Boruto sighed and let his Byakugan fade. Instantly the world returned to normal. When he turned around, Hikari had returned the needles to wherever they had come from. She threw it back at him that she had held in her free hand. "Change into these," she said. "You're a member of the Crimson Tide now. You should look the part," she added, eyeing his threadbare black jacket and slacks. Boruto caught the bag, looking inside. He found a set of fatigues similar to what Hikari herself wore, matte black trimmed in red. At least they have good taste, Boruto thought, thinking back to his favorite outfit he wore in the Hidden Leaf. He pulled the clothes out, examining them. They looked like they would fit. Boruto started to unbutton his jacket when he noticed that Hikari hadn't left. Do you mind?" Boruto asked. "No," Hikari responded flatly. She had her hands held behind her back, standing at rest in a military fashion. Boruto thought he saw the silver gleam of throwing needles, hiding behind her knuckles, ready to be thrown at a moment's notice. Turning away from her, cheeks flaming, he quickly stripped out of his threadbare traveling clothes and into the Crimson Tide fatigues. He resolved to never again practice his Byakugan in front of her. If this was what was going to happen, Hikari nodded to him as she took in his appearance. "Good. Landfall is in approximately 30 minutes. Be ready to disembark then," she commanded, before turning on her heels and stalking out of the room. Boruto tied his hidden Eddie headband right around his skull, before packing up his meager belongings. The Crimson Tide had searched his pack and the scrolls within, but had taken nothing. His scratched leaf headband that marked him as a rogue was sealed in a scrap of paper that he hid in his boots. They hadn't found it. Not that it mattered much. Eiji and Hikari knew he was the son of the Hokage and a leaf ninja. The others, however, didn't. He would prefer to keep it that way, just in case. A bell tolled in the distance, and through the porthole, Boruto could see a flash of bright light every few seconds. There was a dull roar above deck as feet pounded on wood, running above back and forth. Shrugging on his backpack, he slipped out of his cabin, noticing that there weren't any guards posted. Meekly navigating the narrow halls, he made his way above deck. "Furl the sails, ye scurvy bilge rats," Boruto heard Eiji's distinctive, booming voice roar. Men and women scurried across the deck, taking the sails down. A rogue wave rocked the boat, sending misty spray across the deck that soaked the crew. Eiji's laughter boomed over the roar of the ocean. Boruto saw a burly man struggling with the length of rope as the wind threatened to drag him skyward, along with the sail. The man's head turned on a swivel, his eyes locking with Boruto. "Help!" he barked. He didn't even seem to realize that Boruto was a new recruit, jogging across the deck, avoiding other members of the Crimson Tide. He helped the man secure his rigging. Another huge wave rocked the ship. Boruto's stomach lurched as he wrapped his arms around the mast of the ship, along with his newfound comrade. They got an eyeful of the raging ocean for a brief moment, before the ship righted itself. Thunder boomed in the distance as lightning crackled throughout pregnant storm clouds. The weather was getting worse. "Where the hell are we going?" Boruto yelled to the man he had helped earlier. "Shipwreck Isle, not much further now," the man yelled in response. Great, Boruto thought. Shipwreck Isle. Shipwreck. Just where we should go. In a ship. "Hard to port!" Eiji boomed, his voice roaring over the thunder. Through the darkness, a massive spire of rock erupted from the waves. Around it were the carcasses of ships from ages past. They avoided by no more than a few yards. Boruto could have jumped and landed on it. Eiji's laughter boomed over the deck. Boruto didn't think it was that funny. No more than 10 feet away from them, a sudden gust of wind ripped a woman off the deck of the ship and cast her into the night. She screamed, and then was silent. "Man overboard!" the man he helped earlier yelled. The rigging she had been tying down flapped in the wind as the sail went limp. Boruto and the man scrambled over to the flailing rigging, and were joined by another man. The three of them managed to tie down the rigging and secure the sail. A moment later, the woman appeared again, thrown onto the deck of the ship, coughing up water. Boruto watched as Hikari crawled over the ship's railing. Her porcelain hidden mist hunter mask was orange in the lantern light, giving her a fearsome appearance. That was how their voyage continued for nearly 5 minutes. Rogue waves swept across the deck and raging winds tore at their bodies, threatening to send them overboard. Spires of rock and old shipwrecks emerged from the darkness of the night, proving the name of the island they were headed towards. The sound of a bell tolling louder and louder in the night heralded their arrival. Through the darkness, Boruto could make out the sandy beach of an island. "Land ho!" Eiji boomed, breaking into barking laughter. They had nearly beached their ship, sailing as blind as they were. The sailors jumped ship, landing atop the shallow water. Their feet glowed with chakra in the night as they ran ashore, eager to be on solid land once more. Boruto joined them, all too happy to get off the ocean. A large hand slammed into his back, knocking him face first in the sand. Boruto recoiled, spitting out clumps of sand from his mouth. "Nice job, brat. Fine pair of sea legs you got there," Eiji boomed, his voice carrying through the night. Boruto didn't think the man knew what quiet was. "Thanks," Boruto said half-heartedly. Hikari appeared out of thin air, nearly making him jump in surprise. "Come on, brat, let me welcome you to the crew," Eiji said, pulling Boruto to his feet and dragging him towards the flickering candlelights in the distance. He guided him to a rickety old building, with a sign hanging over the door. The Rusty Kunai, it read. A large red-brown colored kunai was hung under the sign, rusted beyond use. Eiji opened the door, with Boruto trailing behind him. Hikari followed behind Boruto, unnerving him. She was too quiet for his tastes, always silent, always observing. Boruto jumped to the side, years of training honing his instincts. 2 large, bare-chested men tumbled on the floor. The larger of the two had pinned the smaller man, and proceeded to beat his face in, beating him his own teeth. Eiji cackled with mirth. "No place like the Rusty Kunai, brat. Finest tavern this side of the world," he boomed. Boruto didn't agree with that, at all. There were men brawling, beating each other half to death with bar stools or empty bottles of liquor. Scantily clad women served food and drink, causing Boruto's cheeks to turn crimson. Some wore more skin than cloth. He wondered why they even bothered to dress at all. Eiji pulled him towards a booth that had been quickly vacated the moment the Crimson Tide members walked in. Boruto, Eiji, and Hikari took a seat, and were joined by several other members of the Mercenary company. The other members found their seats elsewhere in the tavern. Eiji held up his hand, signaling the bartender. The two of them shared a nod. A few moments later, a middle-aged woman dressed in dark leathers brought them a jug of sake and several small cups. Eiji quickly snatched up the bottle, and poured everyone at the table a drink, even Boruto. I'm underage," Boruto protested weakly. Everyone at the table except Hikari burst into laughter. "Not no more you ain't, brat. Old enough to kill, old enough to drink," Eiji barked, lifting his cup in cheers. The rest did the same. They waited for Boruto to join them. He did so, smiling weakly. "To the new blood of the Crimson Tide," Eiji declared, before downing his drink. "Cheers," the others echoed. Only Hikari left her cup on the table, untouched, her mask never moving from its place. Boruto watched the others for a moment, before throwing his cup back and downing the drink in a single gulp like they had. His throat burned and his eyes watered, causing him to cough and sputter. Eiji and the others laughed. One man was brought to tears. Boruto didn't think that it was funny as he choked on his saliva. Hikari sighed heavily at their antics. She placed the palm of her hand on Boruto's back, glowing in a soft green light. The mystic palm instantly soothed the burning in his lungs and let him breathe easier. "Thanks," Boruto beamed, turning to face whoever had helped him. Thank you, ma'am," Boruto quickly added, seeing that it had been Hikari. His master, according to Eiji. Hikari rolled her eyes. She thought he would have saluted had he not been seated. Eiji poured him another cup, sliding it across the table towards Boruto. He sipped this one, not wanting to appear rude or weak. It went down much easier, and he felt the warmth spread from his belly to his limbs. The others descended into conversation. Boruto sat and listened quietly, taking in the sounds of the tavern. Boruto would never admit it, but it was nice, in a way. Warm and loud, with an almost tangible cheer to the atmosphere. He flashed Hikari a smile, noticing that she was doing the same thing he was. Her drink remained untouched, and probably would remain so, Boruto thought. She remained motionless, ignoring him. The large man that Boruto had helped on the ship raised his hand, flagging over one of the barmaids. She wore little more than a strip of cloth around her breasts and a skirt that was sinfully short. Boruto's eyes widened comically as the man groped her. The barmaid didn't even bat an eye. She reached for one of the beer bottles she carried and broke it over the man's skull. Boruto watched as his eyes rolled into the back of his head and was knocked unconscious. He was pretty sure he had a skull fracture too. Everyone in the tavern roared in laughter at the man's fate. Hikari rose, placing the palm of her hand on the man's head. Her hand glowed green for a moment, as she ensured that he wouldn't die from his injuries, or stupidity. Boruto watched in surprise as Hikari, who was only slightly taller than himself and certainly weaker, hoisted the much larger, fully grown man out of his seat and slung him over her shoulder. She carried the man out of the tavern, and from what Boruto could see, headed back to their ship. Eiji wrapped an arm around Boruto's shoulder, causing him to wrinkle his nose as he was assaulted by the strong smell of alcohol. "That's my girl," Eiji boomed, his compliment echoing through the room. Boruto's ears rang. "Strong as an ox, best healer I've ever seen, and I've seen some medics in the war, kid." Boruto just nodded. Eiji pushed his cup towards him. Reluctantly, Boruto took a few small sips, which seemed to satisfy the middle-aged man. "You know," Eiji slurred, "I didn't mean it. What I said in the place about your hands just scared ya." "Why?" Boruto asked. He didn't think he was lying. He seemed too innocent, almost, to lie, and too drunk. Far too drunk. "Seen what your daddy can do," Eiji said, taking another sip of the strong alcohol. "Strongest man I ever seen. Some say he a god. You gonna be strong too. I can feel it in bones." Eiji downed the rest of the drink, leaned back and passed out. Boruto didn't know what he meant. Moving slowly, assuring himself with every movement that the drunken man wasn't going to suddenly wake, Boruto retreated, slipping out under the table. He easily weaved through two women, a barmaid and another girl, who were rolling around on the ground, scratching at each other's eyes and pulling their hair. He quickly made his way back to their ship and found his room. Boruto uttered a silent prayer that no one had stopped him. He hadn't seen a single member of the Crimson Tide, or Hikari. Grinning, he sat cross-legged on his bed and activated his Byakugan. Focusing, he peered at the walls. His range of vision was limited, perhaps only stretching 20 yards, but it was enough. He was alone. Boruto let the Byakugan fade, giddy excitement boiling up inside of him. He held his arm out, displaying the sealing matrix on his forearm. The Crimson Tide had noticed it immediately, but had been unable to open it. Boruto smirked, knowing that it was locked to his own chakra. He pressed his index finger into the correct character, channeling chakra into it. The scroll he had received from the Uzumaki peeked out, the swirling silver caps at the end of the scroll visible. He deftly plucked the scroll from the seal, removing it. Unfurling it for the first time, Boruto began to read. Boruto frowned. After a moment of holding the scroll, inky characters spread across it. His beaming smile returned. "I imagine you have many questions about what you'll be learning in this scroll, my brightest pupil," Boruto read, his mind supplying the voice of the Uzumaki as he read her words. "What is contained in this scroll is the knowledge I myself have learned over the long years, and a compilation of techniques and wisdom gleaned from the scroll of secrets you yourself helped us recover, for which I, and the rest of the clan, will be forever in your debt. The first thing you must learn before continuing your education is exactly why the Uzumaki clan was feared as we were. Our strong vitality and skill with sealing techniques. Of course, all of our clan knows that, but it is why we had strong vitality, and why we were skilled with sealing techniques. That is the question." Boruto pondered that. He didn't really question why the Uzumaki had more vitality than normal people. He didn't really question why other clans had their unique traits either. The Uzumaki clan have a strong yang chakra, the physical energy that governs life. This is our greatest weapon, and the source of our most powerful seals. To master them, you must learn to first knead your chakra into yang chakra. Boruto read the scroll late into the night, until the lone candle that lit his room had burnt out. Boruto awoke the next morning, sluggish and lethargic. He had fallen asleep with a pleasant warmth pulsing throughout his body, courtesy of the drinks Eiji had given him. Now he felt physically sick, even though he wasn't. Groaning, he sat up in bed. Boruto yawned. He flailed as his door was practically kicked down. Hikari strode in, looking like a conquering general touring the battlefield. "Get up. If I have to deal with one more drunken fool today," she threatened. Boruto dressed and made himself presentable faster than he'd ever done before in his entire life. Hikari stormed from his room, stalking down the halls of their ship. Boruto didn't need to be told to follow. He didn't want to imagine what drunken fool she had dealt with already this morning. He was probably dead. Hikari led Boruto down a gangplank and onto the sandy beach of Shipwreck Isle. In the daylight, without the raging storm, the island was nice. Tropical almost. They must have headed south from where Boruto had been. Perhaps an island somewhere in the Gulf south of the Land of Fire, and east of the Land of Wind? It was possible. She led him away from the small rickety town and towards a cove barely visible in the distance from where they had docked. Boruto saw men and women passed out in the sand. The beach was littered with discarded bottles and articles of clothing. Eventually they came upon a secluded cave. Crystal clear blue water pooled in the center, surrounded by white sand with black basalt rocks that loomed over them. A copse of palm trees prevented anyone from spying on them from above. Boruto found that a ragtag band of Crimson Tide members, including their leader Eiji, had gathered in the cove. Boruto saw Takeo, the rogue brute that was so prone to violence, and his partner, that technical fighter from the night he had been caught, Hiroki. There were a few others, people Boruto assumed were high-ranking members of the company. He didn't know their names. Boruto snickered under his breath as he came close enough to make out Eiji's expression. He held his head between his hands, massaging his temples, and looking very unhappy to be awake. Hikari coughed, her hands and her hips, despite the mask. Boruto could tell those hard green eyes were boring holes in the man. The drunken fool had been identified. "Right," Eiji yelled, his voice lacking its normal boom, for which Boruto was eternally thankful. "Time to whip you whelps into shapes, you fools. Our next job is a big one, and we can't have no stragglers. Our client has requested the best of the best, and you lot are it. New blood, you're up. Show us what you can do." Boruto looked around. Everyone was staring at him. He suddenly felt very nervous. Of course, he thought bitterly. New blood. That's you. Newest member. Right. Of course, he wasn't really going to show them what he could do. His Byakugan, gentle fist, and sealing techniques would remain shrouded. Instead, he began weaving hand seals, going through the elemental jutsu he knew. Water release, water bullet jutsu. Lances of water hissed through the air, breaking against the stone walls of the cove. Laughter erupted. Boruto's cheeks turned a shade of crimson. One of the men, a portly man whose shirt was failing to contain his belly, was brought to his knees, tears streaming down his cheeks. Eiji wiped a tear from his eye. "Man, you really are from one of the big villages, ain't ya? Never seen war before. Never even been in a real fight, I reckon," he said. Boruto frowned thunderously at that. He'd been in plenty of real fights. "Ain't never fought a man that was trying to kill ya. Yelling like that only makes his job easier. Gotta be real quiet like you see. Make him guess what the seals are for. Trick him into thinking you're using fire, then unleash water," Eiji lectured. "Hikari, get this brat up to the Crimson Tide standard," he boomed. His voice was back to normal. "We leave in 1 week. Hit and miss is a shipment of weapon-grade chakra metal coming in. And we're gonna liberate him of it." Sarada panted. Her hands rested on her knees. They had searched every island between the Land of Water and Land of Lightning to the north. Every single one. They hadn't found a trace of Boruto. That left only one option. South. Past where they had circled up to the island where Boruto had been taken. Into the gulf between the Lands of Fire and Wind. There had been no word from the Hidden Mist. He had to be there.